Welcome back, Dave. Good to speak with you again this season. And before I go into this season, and I do want to get your perspective on what's been obviously a really tough start to the season for Wolves.
Hmm.
I want to talk about a tough end as well. Ultimately, a good outcome in securing safety, 14th place finish. But when that final whistle did blow, the final game of last season, what were your sort of thoughts as a fan watching the club, thinking about the journey they'd been on last campaign, and maybe a little bit about what you thought they'd need to do if they were going to have a better campaign this time round?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me back on, mate. Yeah, I think that final whistle at Anfield, it was almost like a sigh of relief, because it felt like a long old season last year.
Yeah.
We knew it was going to be tough considering the circumstances that we were given at the start of the campaign, with Lopetegui leaving, so close to the start. Gary O'Neill not really having a pre-season, and he started off really well, probably up until sort of January, Feb. We had some really consistent bits of form within the early conversation of potential European contenders. We knew we still had a lot of work to do. There were still teams like Newcastle and Brighton who were ahead of us. In the end, Chelsea sort of surpassed all of us, but we always knew that was going to be tough. And again, not just Gary O'Neill, sort of Bruno Lage had a similar issue where he wasn't really backed in the January window and just didn't quite strengthen maybe to push us that and get us over that extra hurdle. But I think once Premier League safety was pretty much secured, we started losing a lot of players. Squad depth was all over the place, and we sort of crawled across the finish line in the end. So I think when that final whistle went against you guys, it was like sigh of relief, have our break, and hopefully refreshing and come back next season. Although, as I'm sure we'll talk about, it hasn't really gone the way that Wolves wanted it to. I think they knew it was going to be a long old season. We sort of crawled through, and hopefully, it was a good time to recharge the batteries, really, for both fans and the players as well, I think.
Yeah, it was a strange atmosphere, that final game of last season. Obviously, I think you mentioned yourselves there, Liverpool fans, in this sort of weird stage of denial that comes with grief, I suppose. And then, yeah, given the talents of one Jurgen Klopp, by the end of it, basically tried to use a lot of that energy and turn it around. So it was sort of a weird. I was fully ready to be in mourning for a couple.
Yeah.
Actually, he did sort of turn it around into think about next season. Think about the new manager, and I think that's obviously what's transpired. When you mentioned Gary O'Neill as a new manager, obviously coming in less than ideal circumstances, given the way in which Lopetegui departed. You say got lots of plaudits when he first came in, and I think is well liked as a young coach and a coach who speaks, I think, quite eloquently about the game, about sort of how he's trying to approach it. What do you think he did well last season? What were the things that you think that he deserved praise for? And then what do you think were those factors that you've mentioned a couple of them already that were outside of his control?
Yeah, I think, in terms of negatives to start with, I think, like I said, squad depth was a little bit of a concern. And I don't know, not so much. I think that was out of his control, really, because a lot, we went into the season, we sort of had three strikers, really. Fabio Silva had started the season with us off the back of a pretty decent season out in Europe. We had Sasha Kalajdzic, who's the big sort of 6'7" Austrian who just come back to fitness. And then we knew worst case scenario, Hwang or Matheus Cunha could fit in there. And very quickly, it became, despite Fabio Silva had started the season and came very close on a couple of occasions, and it didn't work out for him. Sasha Kalajdzic was coming off the bench and scored a couple of late winning goals. But really, a player Sasha's, like I said, stature is 6'7", but there's not much to him. He's not like a Haaland where he's a big physical presence and quick. Sasha's quite one-dimensional. So I don't think Gary wanted to start him throughout games. And it became very evident throughout the season that he didn't like Fabio Silva and he didn't like Sasha Kalajdzic. So he sort of went into January, let both of them go, and didn't bring another striker in. And then when Matheus Cunha got injured, that's when you've all of us, and Hwang was injured for a short while. We're then having to rely on 17 and 18-year-olds who had never kicked a ball in the Premier League before. And ultimately that cost us points. It cost us a place in the FA Cup. We lost out to Coventry. We went 2-1 up and we took that away there. I think we could have we could have won that game with a more senior striker for sure. VAR was another one. We were really unfortunate with VAR last year. Gary O'Neill was pretty vocal about that and, made his point clear about that a number of times. Well, in terms of what he did well, I think because he's such a young coach, he's not actually been out of as a player out of the professional game very long. So I think on a personal level, he sort of related with a lot of the players a lot more because he pretty much only just come out of the dressing room as a player within the last few years or so. So I think the togetherness and the morale of the squad, there were some games, last year where, we grabbed it by the scruff of the neck and we got 3 points. There were certain games, I think Fulham at home is one that I remember when we're having this issue. And I think Mario Lemina played in about 3 or 4 different positions. And I remember him just collapsing to the floor at the end of the game. And I think they've left absolutely everything out there. And some managers you just don't get that out of. So there were certain games where I thought, fair enough, he's getting that. But we're not quite seeing the same sort of level of that yet, I don't think, this season. But certainly from a togetherness point of view, Gary O'Neill, at times, I'm not going to say every single game, but at times it felt as a fan that we're finally getting a good team in team spirit and getting the fans on side as well, which was a big plus, I think, after Lopetegui walked out on us so early in the season.
Yeah, I do obviously remember sort of the Wolves put that motion forward to have VAR scrapped as well. I think more so in actually hope that there would be a discussion. I think around
sure, I think that was it.
Rather than actually happening. We're only a few games into this season. It remains to be seen whether or not, or just how much they've learned or not learned. I think that word consistency seems to be coming up already this season in terms of, okay, if you're going to officiate on that kind of thing, then why aren't you doing it? Which is not a VAR issue. That's more about the officials, I suppose. But we'll come on to that in a little bit. You mentioned. And I remember speaking to you actually about Gary O'Neill and his comments in the January or ahead of the January window, making comments about the need for investment, but expecting that he wasn't necessarily going to get it in that window. And so I suppose when you go to the end of the season, if you were thinking about the areas that needed to be focused on by Gary O'Neill, sure, you could talk about squad positions and transfers, and feel free to do that. But in terms of just if you had like a list of 2 or 3 priorities that you think, okay, these are the things that he needs to focus on for next season, what did you think they were?
Yeah, I think in terms of transfers, I think a centre half was very important, and an actual proper number 9, a striker, because I think that's what let us down last season. And yeah, I think that the Kilman sale in the summer was a bit of a surprise because I didn't expect Kilman to go. I think Pedro Neto was the obvious one who did end up moving on to Chelsea. I think we all expected him to move on. Kilman's was a bit more of a surprise, but I think the frustration is that we haven't sort of replaced him, and I'm sure we'll come on to it, but I think Wolves are already regretting that, to be honest. We've still strengthened the squad. We've brought in some very good players. I think Andre is a very good defensive-minded midfielder from Brazil. But I think for Gary O'Neill going into the summer, it was obvious that he wanted to try and get some sort of back four to work. He started with that at the start of last season, and it just didn't quite work. And he reverted to the back 5, which worked fine, and we're scoring goals. And to be honest, I wouldn't have been against sticking with that. I think with the right personnel, you can make that work. I'm not going to say you're going to win the Premier League with it, because I think Chelsea are probably the last team under Conte to win the Premier League with that sort of system. But you certainly, we're certainly going to win a lot more football matches playing that sort of style. So I think he could have stuck with that and just brought in better players for certain positions, because it's not like, until the injuries, we were scoring a good amount of goals and creating a lot of opportunities. But he tried to change it during pre-season. As far as, right now, we're still sticking with that shape. But certainly there are areas to focus on. Defence and attack really were the main ones. They've looked at that to a degree, but I think a few fans are still pretty disappointed with how we've come out of the transfer window without some top quality players, to be honest.
Yeah, and you mentioned those signings we could talk about signings that were made, but the signings and the positions that weren't addressed, the Kilman departure being a surprise. We'll come on to talk about how that's even more under the spotlight recently, right? Given or the injury to Mosquera that we'll come on to.
Yep.
But in terms of the players that did come in, I'm interested in sort of your view on those players and how they address some of the needs in the squad. So there's Andre from Fluminense, naturally actually heavily linked with Liverpool earlier in the previous windows, actually, as maybe the solve for their number 6 issues. Rodrigo Gomez has come from Braga, again, very young, 20 years old. Sam Johnston is an older figure in the squad, 31 from Palace, as a goalkeeping option. And then, again, just a couple of younger options like Pedro Lima, Tommy Doyle, Bastian Imperio, all 18, 22, 18. So you could, again, that kind of approach of, like buying younger players with the hope of them developing, again, targeting the Portuguese league where possible, and then hoping that they develop. And then I presume the idea would be to sell those on for profit in the future, reinvesting some of the money gained from Pedro Neto going for about 60 million euros to Chelsea, and Max Kilman for about 47 million euros to West Ham. Just give me your thoughts on those players who came in, and I mean, how well you think the club has reinvested some of that money that was brought in.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned some of the players there. We've signed a couple of players, guys that have come on loan with sort of obligations to buy. Jurgen Strand-Larsen, who's a striker who looks pretty lively at the moment. Carlos Forbes, who's a young lad that used to play for Manchester City as well. But I think certainly from an outside point of view, they're probably looking at that and thinking, how have Wolves received this amount of money and not really pumped it back into the squad? I think it was heavily reported about sort of our FFP or PSR issues previously as well. Probably not as bad as like the likes of Forest and Everton were, but we were certainly still in a bit of a sticky situation. But as fans, we thought we were over that. I think we sort of all understood we still had to be like a sell to buy policy, but certainly haven't quite invested that amount of money. With Kilman going for 40 million, you would expect 20 to 30 million of that to be put back into the same position, and we weren't really in that. I think the players that we signed are quality, but certainly Gary O'Neill was talking a lot in January as well and in the summer about wanting Premier League proven and Premier League quality footballers, and we haven't really had that. I'm all for signing younger players and sort of flipping them for a profit in 3, 4, 5 years' time. But certainly I think to remain as a Premier League team, you still need a core of those players. Sam Johnston is one of those, but wasn't an essential player because we've still got Jose Sarr in the books. I think there's sort of a bit of a split in the fan base about Jose Sarr, but certainly, unless he was desperate to leave or unless we had a move lined up for him, I don't think Sam Johnston was a necessary signing, to be honest, especially for the money that we paid for him. So it was a risky strategy from Wolves. Certainly could pay off in a number of years' time, but I think now they just needed some sort of stability until we had a really good core squad, which I still think we do. We've got very good footballers, but I still think there were other areas and with experience that we should have paid for the experience to strengthen the squad, and then have these almost fringe players as the younger lads that we can bleed in as and when. But I don't know. At the time, at the end of the window, I think it was a good window, but I think you very quickly realise when the season starts, and you can very quickly see certain areas. I think Rodrigo Gomez was a big one. Had a great season for out on loan last season in Portugal. Had a great pre-season for us, and Gary O'Neill just doesn't trust him so far either. Just not giving him the chance. A really strange start to the season, really.
You mentioned 2 positions there that obviously weren't really addressed, right? But looking for a proper number 9 to come in, like a different kind of number 9 to come in, and actually supplementing like the defense with an additional centre back. That was before you knew that Max Kilman, who's been captain in the past, right, was due to be leaving the club. Has there been? I mean, what sort of comments? Because I presume there's been questions, right, to Gary O'Neill and the club around those positions and the decision not to actually move on those areas. What's been sort of the pushback from the club on why they weren't strengthened?
So the striker situation was solved quite quickly. I think that was an obvious one because Sasha Kalajdzic, who had gone out on loan for the second half of last season, did his ACL again, so we knew he wasn't going to come back and be the number 9. Fabio Silva pretty much made it clear before the end of last season he didn't want to stay at Wolves, so we knew that was a massive hole in the squad, and Wolves had addressed that quite quickly. I think Strand-Larsen was signed before pre-season had even started. We'd signed Pedro Lima and even activated Tommy Doyle's purchase clause. And before you even start pre-season and you've confirmed 3 signings, as fans, you're sort of rubbing your hands together thinking, okay, we could have a really productive and proactive, transfer window here. And it just after that, it just slowed down massively. We didn't see any real movements. Even rumours were just dead quiet, really. The centre-back one was interesting because Kilman went, and I think we all knew that the plan was to sign somebody else there. And again, the later in the window it got, the quieter it got on certain players. We were linked with players, but nothing really seemed to be too solid. I think from the club's point of view, they half expected Mosquera to be that like-for-like replacement, which is fair enough. And I like Mosquera, but ultimately he's been injured now, which, you know, we didn't know at the time. But we don't have a lot of Premier League experience there. They signed Bastien Moypieux as a young 18-year-old French centre-back, injured already, so no real point in signing him. So yeah, and I think now, like I said, Mosquera has been injured. There are a lot of questions being asked of the football club because now we've got Totti injured, Mosquera's injured, Moypieux's injured, so we've only got 2 senior fit centre-backs. So it's not like if we're struggling still in a couple of weeks' time, Gary O'Neill can't really press that panic button and go back to a back 5 because he hasn't got the centre-backs to play it anyway. So yeah, the people are disappointed, very disappointed, and we filled up our registration for foreign players. So it's not like we can bring in someone that you're familiar with, like Matip, who's a free agent. We can't bring someone like that in. So yeah, it's a bit of a sticky situation there, to be honest, and it's frustrating because I think the rest of the window, although I've sort of thrown a few question marks about it in the last 5 minutes, I think it was productive in terms of the players that we've got, and you can see there's some sort of vision from Wolves, but that's one of the most important areas of the pitch, and defensively we haven't been good for the last few years. That should have been addressed. That should have been one of the key areas, especially as soon as Kilman went.
Yeah, it does feel strange, especially with losing somebody a bit of stalwart like that from the squad. Actually, I completely forgot about Strand Larson because he came in so early. He needed
That's all right, yeah.
mention him, but in terms of the centre back position, I think we'll come on to Mosquera and ultimately what's happened there. But I did want to jump into this season and obviously talk about what you've seen so far. It's 4 losses out of 5. That 1 draw coming against Nottingham Forest. Again, there's some tough fixtures in there. Arsenal, Chelsea. Again, admittedly, you don't really know what you're going to get from Chelsea, but they do obviously have a lot of attacking talent there at their disposal. Villa, who are formidable at home as well. Newcastle, not super easy either, but some of those games are tight. Some of them are less tight. I want to ask you. You mentioned some tweaks that you'd already seen in pre-season from a tactical perspective from Gary O'Neill. What have you seen so far in these opening fixtures? I mean, like in terms of, is it as simple as what I'm sure it's not. It's not as simple as what we see on paper with just the results, right? I mean, give us your view on how those games have gone, if the results do reflect the performances, or if it is a bit of what you're mentioning there around youth, inexperience, injuries coming together to make it a difficult start.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of everything, really. I think we've had some very good sort of, not performances as a whole, but some really good moments in all of those games. And in the Premier League, if you don't take advantage of those moments, you're going to get punished. Arsenal was always going to be a tough one, going there on the opening day of the season. I think 2 mistakes really from us cost us that game, but there was a good half an hour, 40 minutes where Arsenal had 11 men behind the ball and our back 4 was playing on their halfway line, which when you're away at the Emirates, you probably don't expect to see. The Chelsea game, 2-2 at half time. We had all the momentum going into half time. And again, gave away every single goal and ended up losing 6-2 to Chelsea, which I think was a bit of a freak result, to be honest. I think that did flatter them slightly. Forest, again, they've had a really good start to the season anyway, Forest, to be fair, but we haven't got a fantastic record away there. And I think, if you can pick up a point away from home, yes, it's okay. I think against teams like Forest, you probably want to try and push for the win, but, ultimately they've started off quite well. And the last 2 games, Newcastle and Villa, really frustrating because we were ahead in both games, 1-0 up in both games. The Newcastle game in particular, we had, really good momentum and it created good chances, hit the post a couple of times, and 2 long-range goals that cost us that match, and that was frustrating. And the Villa game, 1-0 up, cruising at half-time again, and almost, it felt like a complete shift in tactics where we went really defensive, and I think all the Wolves fans knew if Villa score the next goal here, there's only going to be one winner, and ultimately we lost that game 3-1. But yeah, a lot of people pointing the finger maybe at fitness, because after that 60-minute mark, we just seem to be going downhill rapidly. And I don't know if that's an easy excuse, but certainly, you know, we're not seeing out games. You know, we're losing points from winning positions, which is frustrating. But there have been good moments, and there is a situation where within the next few weeks, it might just click for Wolves, and we might just say, "Oh, what were we so worried about?" But certainly at the moment, it's not getting any easier for Gary, because there's already pressure mounted on him, despite a tough start. You know, the teams that I've mentioned are all in the top six, I think, at the moment. We play you guys this weekend. We've got City in two games time as well. We've got Brentford in between. I think next week against Brentford's a massive one for Gary, because, you know, football's not played on paper, but say you guys beat us, which I think a lot of people are going to expect. Next weekend against Brentford, he has to win, because if he loses that game and then goes into City and say you lose what you sort of 7-8 games into the season, you include last year, I think we've only won 1 in 16 league games as it is. You include another 3 games in that. You don't keep your job if you've won 1 Premier League game out of nearly 20 matches. So he's under big pressure, I think, Gary O'Neill. Games like this obviously don't make it any easier. And I do feel sorry for him, because you can see what he's trying to achieve. But ultimately, it's just not quite working for him at the moment.
Yeah, I was just looking into some of the details about your start, and I think actually when people have run the numbers, Opta's ranked it as the hardest set of fixtures to start the Premier League season than any of the clubs in the league, given the people that you faced, right? And there's as you mentioned there as well. I mean, again, running the numbers, look at the XG that you've actually conceded.
The Chelsea game was a good one. Have you seen the XG for that one? So they beat us 6-2, and we had a higher XG than them in that game.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. They are slightly getting catfish in that club at the moment. Not entirely sure what's going on there, but they just so much quality in there that maybe it's just clicking. But I think to those points, right? I mean, low XG's not actually been as high as the number of goals you conceded. Mm-hmm. You mentioned yourself a couple long range efforts in there. How often are they to be replicated? The hardest start in the Premier League with all these teams. Owners don't tend to care about this kind of stuff, right? I mean, you can try and persuade your fans on the way to the game. Like, come on, it's been harder. I suppose the job now is actually about half of the job is basically keeping the morale up, you know, in the squad, to say, look, there's going to be easier fixtures coming up. There's an opportunity for us to get points back on the board. Let's not, you know, put our heads down with the teams that we're facing. That Brentford game, as you mentioned, a huge one. So I guess that's part of the job for O'Neill, is that kind of persuasion of not just the fan base, but the squad and the higher ups. Because as you say, I think if it does, combining it with last season, then it tends to, like, obviously not look super favorable. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about, I mean, a player who was viewed as, you know, one of the solutions to the centre back problem in Mosquera, who, yeah, I think has he been ruled out of the season now, or is it
pretty much? Yeah,
so it could be a significant part of the season. Is ACL injury? Yeah. So I just wanted to ask you first off, just invest, I suppose, like, perversely, how was he doing? How was he looking at that role? Because that's always the way. And then, I mean, just how significant do you view that injury?
Yeah, it's quite a big blow for Wolves, really, because I think we'd sign him. This is sort of what I was sort of talking about earlier. It was a really niche signing, you know, to bring someone in from Colombia as it was at sort of 18 years of age. He was spent a little bit of time at Wolves. Was it with the pre-season? Started a Carabao Cup game a few years ago, and again, quite a serious injury, and we didn't see him for the rest of that season. Going back up to fitness, he had about a year in America with Cincinnati. Then I had a half season last year at Villarreal and did really well over in Spain. I think Wolves were like, right, he's ready now for, top league football. So he's pretty much, everyone thought, yep, he's going to be starting. He started, pretty much took Max Kilman's place. Sort of, I don't know, he brought something to the team that we hadn't really seen in a long time, because Kilman was a solid enough player, but almost felt a bit shy, despite being a club captain. Felt a bit shy, and with Mosquera, it was almost the total opposite. He wasn't scared to get in an opponent's face. He wasn't scared. You saw the opening game against Arsenal. He had his hand round Havertz's throat. He had his hand on Gabriel Jesus' backside. And the Arsenal fan base was it. They lost their heads completely. And they couldn't understand how he hadn't been sent off. And I was there like, Right, he has got to be careful, but this is something that we've not seen in a long time, in at Wolverhampton Wanderers. In terms of his physical attributes, he could play a high line because his recovery is very good. He's got the pace to turn it around and so on. But yeah, against Villa, he had this really late tackle by Morgan Rogers, which wasn't necessary to be fair, but looked nasty. You could see there was a picture almost his knee was like the complete wrong way, bent completely back. So yeah, that's a huge loss for Wolves. But again, straight away, the people blaming the club because of the lack of investment in that area. So really, the only two fit centre-backs we've got now are Craig Dawson and Santiago Bueno, are solid enough defenders, but in terms of physical attributes, are almost the complete opposite to the likes of Totti and Mascara. So if Gary O'Neill wants to play this sort of high-pressing, high-line football, you can't with those two players. So that will change things a lot. It'll be interesting because I do think games against Liverpool where you're probably not going to have as much as the ball and your defensive line is going to be a bit deeper, it may work in our favour. But certainly in games that you expect to dominate possession and dominate the play, it might change things a little bit more. So, yeah, big loss for Wolves anyway. And I think they're going to have to, invest in January. That's going to be one of the urgent things, I think, for them in the winter window.
I was going to ask him, putting you into Gary O'Neill's shoes. We already talked a little bit about it, right? Getting through these next couple of games, picking up points in the fixtures that are more favourable on paper anyway. And I suppose the message already is, getting to January, reinvesting, righting the wrongs of not having sort of strength and depth in those positions. I suppose, do you think that's already kind of reset fans' expectations about what they can reasonably expect this season from the club? Tempered them already?
I think there's a lot of people now that are already thinking Wolves are going to be in serious trouble. It's difficult because, like you mentioned earlier, it's sort of trying to find that balance of you're trying to reassure people and saying, guys, let's look at the start that we've had here. And that's what Gary O'Neill's probably he made a comment about if you looked at all of our fixtures, if you looked at with the bookmakers, we probably would have been second favourite in every single game, which is sort of right. But at the same time, as fans, you don't want to hear that. Why is a manager saying, "No, look at the odds"? Or as a manager, you as a fan, you want the manager to pretty much think we can go into every game to win the match. So yeah, there's a little bit of pressure on Gary now, and I think fans are sort of just bored of it. I think Wolves fans in general, we were so spoilt with Nuno a number of years ago because we won a lot more than we lost, even when we came into the Premier League, because he won the Championship, had 2 back-to-back 7th place finishes. And ever since then, I think we have been a little bit spoiled when things aren't going our way. We sort of say, well, we should be fighting for Europe. When I think if you take you sit back a little bit and actually look at the situation, we're not as good as we were back then. So I think he's under pressure, Gary O'Neill, because you go into the next few games. Our run between the start of November and Christmas is really favourable. Teams that I would say are going to be in and around or below us in the league. But can you afford to give Gary O'Neill until then? Because if you go into November and he carries on losing games, fans will be even more upset that we didn't bite the bullet. So both are maybe looking at things and say, if we get a new manager in by the end of October and he's got this stretch of games to win some matches, keep the morale up, and we go from there, I don't know. But difficult few weeks for him. Definitely a difficult few weeks for him.
You mentioned actually a little bit earlier around maybe not seeing the same level of desire and work rate from the players this season that you saw at times last season. And I think that's one of the most damning things, right? Whenever you see that for a prolonged period of time, managers, that tends to be when you think they're losing their way and then they lose faith of the fans, the board. Has that been a consistent thing this season, or has it been that's happened after the losses, heavy loss at Chelsea by for example, narrow defeats where things have turned around and the injuries have added to that? Or have you been concerned about that kind of buy-in since the start?
Yeah, I mean, it's not nothing obvious just yet, but certainly when things become a lot more negative, you do start to see that sort of thing. But a lot more finger pointed, I think, on the pitch. Certain players blaming other players for things, or certain players shouting across to the touchline, basically questioning what a player's just done. Whereas the Wolves of last year, completely different, really. So I think that's the main thing for Gary, that he's got to keep his squad on side. Because if again, it's difficult because in games against Liverpool and Manchester City, you don't write them off, but you earmark them on the calendar as games that you're probably not going to get 3 points out of. But certainly when you've lost it, well, you haven't picked up a win, you're getting desperate. So I think these every football player wants to win football matches, and Wolves have sort of built a squad and made a conscious effort of building a squad of players that have got the sort of right attitude. And if we're not seeing that attitude from these players, all of a sudden, it's going to be a bit of a concern. So that's I think if Gary O'Neill starts to lose some of the players, I think for his own job security, he's in a bit of trouble, because I think we did so well for a period of last year because he got all those players on side and they're all going in the right direction. As soon as there's a small group of those that aren't going in that direction, that's when I think him and the club are going to be in a bit of trouble, really.
I was going to say as well, when you're thinking about, because I was thinking to myself, sure, replace Gary O'Neill, but bring in somebody else who's going to be dealt with the same circumstances, the same squad, the limitations, the injuries. Like, what are they going to do? But I think that point you just mentioned, right? I think the one thing that a new face could do is get more out of the players if they have just stopped believing in the methods and like thinking, oh, this is not going to get us what we need. So that is, I think that's going to be the most interesting factor to watch really with Gary O'Neill. Can he retain that confidence in players? And you mentioned, obviously the game this weekend away, and Liverpool will be travelling to Wolves. Had some very difficult games there in the past. Can remember a lot of them, certainly under Nuno as well. And I'm thinking about Nuno, given the difficulty Liverpool had with Forest, obviously losing at Anfield doesn't happen. Yes, it's obviously unacceptable, but like the game plan was there, right? And sure, Liverpool dominate the ball. 9 times out of 10, you're going to create more. You're going to score those chances. But the Wolves game plan was there. We've seen that before from Nuno when he was at the Forest game plan was there. We've seen that before from him when he was at Wolves to great effect. Do you think you're expecting kind of a similar game plan from O'Neill this weekend, especially given what you said about the centre backs, right, and the inability to maybe to play that high line?
Yeah, I think so. I think the beauty with this current Wolves squad is as an counter-attacking side. I think that's probably our strength, really. And I think Nuno's tried it, Bruno Lage tried it, Lopetegui tried it. They tried to make us a team that controls possession and controls the tempo of the game. And I just don't think you don't see that a lot from teams sort of outside the top 6, top 8. So I think certainly counter-attacking is probably our best chance of scoring goals, and we've certainly got that. Likes of Matheus Cunha, his ability to drive forward, and even Strand Larsen, who his work rate off the ball could certainly help us. So I think we'll sit deep. We'll probably allow Liverpool the ball, and then counter-attack's going to be our best option. Counter-attack or set pieces, really. So similar to probably how Nuno played with Forest against you guys. But like I said earlier, Gary O'Neill's desperate for points. I think for Wolves, it's important to try and not concede early, because that's what we did against Chelsea, and we sort of lost. We sort of got it back very quickly, but we lost our heads very quickly, and then conceded early in the second half, and then we just fell apart completely. I think the longer we can go in the game and keep ourselves in it, we've got every chance of coming out of the match with something. But it could, if Liverpool score early, it could turn toxic quite quickly, I think, at Molineux on Saturday.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, that was the key factor in the Wolves game, in the Forest game, rather. It's Nuno's fault. Is just how because that goal didn't come for Liverpool, there was the apprehension. It took a bit longer, and actually, it's not been the case. I mean, that so far, Arne Slot, I mean, most of his games, I think one of the big differences that I can remember from this season, from last season already, is just how much time Liverpool have been ahead in games. Last season, for all the amazing attacking numbers we put up, very often it was coming from behind. We conceded early, sloppy, and we'd find a way back into these games. Now it's been a lot more getting ahead. If we get the second, okay, like that can be game over. We can just, whatever it's called, someone on these pods calls it garbage time, right? Around like, okay, we're just trying to move the ball around a little bit. Yeah, we might concede a few more chances, but we're playing low intensity. And we haven't seen that from Liverpool for a number of seasons, actually. So it's been nice to see, but you do need that goal, right? I mean, to actually play that way. That's going to be interesting. And Cunha, for me, I think is a really interesting one, because that ability to drive and go straight through Liverpool, I think that is probably one of the main concerns I have at the moment. I think the midfield's operating really well. Gravenberg's been a revelation so far, but that role's not supernatural to him. And can he track those runners? Certainly early on in games, we've noticed them a little bit vulnerable actually. So away from home, difficult situation. Fans up for it as well. I think that'll be those first 10, 15 minutes. I think are going to be really, really key in that game. But I want to ask you. I mean, it's always good to get rival fans' perspectives on. There had been a change. I mean, for so long at Liverpool, there wasn't a change. You sort of knew what you were going to get with Jurgen Klopp. Now Arne Slot's come in, kind of new look-ish Liverpool. I just, given what you've seen, how much you've seen of Liverpool, just wanted your perspective on what kind of side you think you're facing. Like if there's any sort of noticeable tweaks for you or things that you're expecting different, and I guess who are you least looking forward to dealing with, or is like a particular player that you're looking at this season, thinking, okay, maybe they're the one who are going to be the danger man this time?
Yeah, I think we've had probably out of the sort of traditional sort of top four, I think Liverpool are the team we've probably had the least to look against it within a Premier League campaign. We beat you under Lopetegui, and I think we beat you in the FA Cup, but other than that, we haven't really had much joy against you guys. So Liverpool's always a tough game. I think, whoever came in after Jurgen Klopp, it was going to be a really tough task anyway. I think he's doing okay so far from the outside. He's just got to make sure results like that Nottingham Forest one aren't a common occurrence, really. Say for argument's sake on Saturday, I think there'll be a little bit of an inquest if we manage to get 3 points. I think there'll be a lot of Liverpool fans disappointed with that. I think in terms of the players, the squad is full of top players. I mean, the midfield battle will be really intriguing because I would say on paper that's probably Wolves' strongest area. I'll be intrigued to see if Gary changes that up a little bit. I think Andre will definitely start. He's been very good over the last couple of games. Lemina, the club captain, João Gomez, although hasn't been at his best the last couple of weeks, still obviously a very good player as well. Cunha, who we've already mentioned, up against your back four, Van Dijk and co, don't really need any introduction. But Salah, obviously, and Diaz as well. Luis Diaz has hit that little bit of form towards the start of the season. Obviously, always been a very good player, but I think he's just needed that consistency of minutes as well. So Wolves have been very leaky at the back, very poor. We've still got quality throughout the team, and like I said earlier, it just needs to click. I'm hoping it's Saturday, but I don't think many Wolves fans are holding their breath, to be honest. But going to be a really tricky game, and probably not the game that Gary O'Neill wants to be having this Saturday, to be completely honest.
No, I can expect it. On paper, it's certainly not what you'd want after this kind of run of fixtures, right? And so I think midfield's going to be interesting. Andre, I think, given those links that there were between him and Liverpool, if he has a incredible game on Saturday, people go, oh, okay, this is what we want. He decided not to act upon. And I think, we're going to pan on Lemina, and João Gomez is obviously very highly rated as well. So that's going to be interesting for sure. And you're right, Diaz, something seems to have clicked this season with Diaz in terms of, I don't know, maybe simplifying his role. Someone telling him, like, we know you can dribble, but you don't have to try and beat four people and shoot. Just try and shoot in the box. And then, lo and behold, he's become a bit more effective. I mean, David, if I was to ask you like a wrap-up question here, I mean, what are your, put you on the spot, what are your expectations for the season at this stage, and what would your sort of goal be if someone was to ask you right now, like if you could take a result in this for the whole season?
At this stage, to be honest, I think it's Premier League safety. I think, as mad as it sounds, I think we're in a position now where I put on social media the other day. I think I was concerned after the Mosquera injury, certainly, but I still think this Wolves squad is far too good to be even in this conversation. I think the quality of players that we've got, and I got a lot of backlash for that, and I couldn't believe the negativity from Wolves fans at the moment. It is crazy, and the amount of people that were sort of calling for Gary O'Neill's head already so early, considering the fixtures. So I think it's going to be a long old season. I think if someone says, right, you will be a Premier League team next year, I'd shake your hand now and say, okay, thank you very much. But not really expecting much more than that, to be honest. But things in the Premier League can change so quickly. I think Bournemouth went 9 games without a win last year, and Iraola was, I think he was nominated for manager of the season in the end. He did an okay job. So I'm hoping things can change. I'm hoping Gary O'Neill's the man to do it. If he's not, I'm hoping Wolves time a new appointment correctly if needs be, and we could climb up the table. But I think Premier League safety is the goal, and I think there's a lot of people. I mentioned about the owners earlier. Sort of their interest seems to have come away from pushing money into Wolves and trying to make them a much stronger team. I think they're just a lot of people are sort of come to the agreement now that I think Wolves are just the owners are just happy to make sure Wolves finish 17th or above and just keep their Premier League status. They haven't really wanted to pump the money in, but if by Christmas we're in a bit of trouble, I'm sure they'll drastically find 150 million to pump into the team in January to make sure we can survive. But they can't keep going on like this because it will come back to bite them soon enough. But yeah, Premier League survival, mate, is the key, I think, unfortunately.
Yeah, the crude language, like no fans like to hear it, like protecting their investment.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah,
but that is exactly what I would expect as well, right? Suddenly the money taps get turned on when there's a risk. I think I'd be inclined to agree with you as well. To be honest, I think there's too much talent in that squad to be mixing it with some teams that have come up. I mean, let's face it, the ones that have come up into the Premier League, I think, are the ones I'd expect to be struggling. Again, just like it was last season, to be honest, based on squad depth. Though Everton might prove me wrong because they really are putting in some great performances as of late, much to the enjoyment, of plenty of the listeners. But hey, I want to thank you just for coming on and giving us all your insights. It's not the nicest task for me to ask you to come on, especially given the end of last season, the start of the season. But hopefully it's been a little bit cathartic, and I like that you're shining a bit of a positive light out there amongst the gloom of Wolves fans. So yeah, thank you very much for
my pleasure, man. Thank you for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much.